Behold, my glorious supporter Lord Rusty has requested some reviews of homebrewed 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons spells. Let's give you some context. In a follow-up to last month's Parley, Lord Rusty requests a spell review. I'm currently in the process of making the Morellonomicon, which is a League of Legends item that's a spell book in a flavor, into a 5th edition magic item containing spells inspired by League of Legends items and spells. I've provided a PDF to some of the spells I've made so far. I've tried to include the ones that either I thought were the most interesting or which there was contention at my table at what level they should be placed at. I'd like both your opinion on them as game pieces and what level you'd place them at for as many spells as you think is reasonable for a parlay. Oh, I can do them all. I looked over them before we started. Given that these are all wizard spells, I've tried to include the format of a wizard's name followed by a spell name for some of them in the style of like Mordenkainen's Mansion or Melf's Acid Arrow. Cool. Sounds fun. Yeah, I took a look at these briefly just to get an idea of what I was getting into, but I've read a lot of them, so I will read them to you as I talk about them. So yeah, it seems Lord Rusty has given one of their players, as the DM of a campaign, this spell book that has a variety of spells in it. Quite a powerful thing to gain as a player, don't you think? And we're now going to do some design critique for these spells. Very fun. I like this kind of thing. Let's get started. So I'll read the flavor for the book. This is the Morellonomicon. Easy for me to say, the Morellonomicon. An ancient tome referred to in prophecy, its words written in a mirror script with spells inscribed within by wizards unknown to the histories of this world. This vellum book is bound in chains and emits a blue light when the caster in possession of it casts spells found from within its pages. Yes, delicious. I'm not going to read the whole thing like that. Zareth's Arcane Artillery, I.S. Zareth, the classic wizard in League of Legends. I mean, it's not entirely untrue, but I expected like Rise or someone. Anyway. Zareth's Arcane Artillery. This is an evocation spell. Remember, these don't yet have levels that they're at. We're supposed to do that. So it's a casting time 1 action evocation spell with a duration of 1 minute, verbal and somatic components. Your entire body lights up with crackling energy, pinning you in place to stabilize you. Your movement speed is reduced to 0 for the duration of the spell. Okay? I know Zareth from League of Legends, so I know what this is going to do. I'm going to be critiquing the way you decided to do it. While this spell's active, you can use your action to launch a ball of arcane energy up to 1,000 feet, whoa, dealing 3d12 force damage in a 15-foot radius. That's pretty good. The range is crazy. The ideal range of this spell is 200 feet. Ooh, that's a little messy. We'll come back to that. And to hit a target at that distance, you must make a spell attack against AC 10. I don't like this way of doing it, but we'll come back to it. This AC increases by 1 for every 10 feet nearer than 200 or 20 feet further than 200. Yeah, that part's way too mathy for my taste anyway. For every point you fail to miss this armor class by, the spell misses its mark by an additional 5 feet. So if you're confused, the way this is meant to work is that you're launching more like a cannon instead of targeting an individual, and then AC is being used as a way to figure out how much you miss by, basically. And part of the balancing of this spell would be that it's got that long range, but you're pretty likely to miss by some distance because the further out it gets, so 20 feet further than 200. So if you multiply that by 10, another 200 feet, so 400, suddenly the AC you need to hit is 20 to hit someone 400 feet away. And so you'll miss a decent amount of the time, and then the explosion will be off by a little bit. It's got a 15-foot radius, so you can be off by a little, but not by a lot. Does that make sense? So that's how it's meant to work. I don't like this way of doing it. I think it's very messy, and I feel like D&D already has ways for this to work. I don't feel it's really necessary to do it this way. First of all, I think rather than it missing the target by a little bit, it might be better to just have this be a saving throw, and then the targets can save for half. If they miss the save, they take full damage. If they succeed on the dexterity probably save, they take half damage. And that means the spell has the flavor of kind of missing by a little bit without you having to do math to figure out like where it would hit, Additionally, I think that we need to do something about the way it targets. I'm not opposed to the idea that it's got long range balanced by the fact that it's less accurate, but I'm not sure that I like this way of doing it, where if again, it feels kind of hacky. We could use the, normal and long range rules for ranged weapons. You could keep it a spell attack, but just have it have a normal range of 200 feet and a long range of 1,000 feet. You simply get disadvantage if you attack people beyond 200 feet. And you could then give it a minimum range of, 100 feet, let's say. That is not the same as the effect of this, but it is similar, and it's dramatically simpler. It's also the same as ranged weapons already are in D&D, which I think is pretty elegant. You are basically turning yourself into a catapult that's firing magic. So I like the idea that it feels like you become a ranged weapon. You're basically becoming a cannon. This is very similar to being a cannon. I would be inclined to just take the stats of a cannon and directly put them on this spell. You just become a magic cannon. That's it. And then it should be a bit powerful because you do reduce your movement speed to 0, and you're using your action to launch the shots. So it's just giving you an upgrade to the output you'd normally have. This spell is in concept a lot like Witch Bolt. Witch Bolt is a spell that you fire a bolt of lightning, you connect to a target, you do some initial damage, and then additional turns after that, you can keep concentrating on the spell and use your action to automatically hit with some modest damage. Now, it's better than like a cantrip would have done if you'd spammed a cantrip in place of this, but it's not that much better. So the idea is it gives you kind of like a damage upgrade. It's like a weird form of a damage buff. And that's, I think, the balance for this one. This is kind of like it's different, but overall kind of like a better version of Witch Bolt. There are higher level versions of the thing Witch Bolt does. So maybe this one could be like medium level. I like the idea of this being maybe 3rd or 4th level. I remember some kind of Witch Bolt type thing. I think Enervation, but I might be misremembering. That's like 5th or 6th level. So having this be 3rd level kind of interests me. 3d12 force damage every attack. Is that okay? Seems a little high. I'm thinking about like fireballs. So like you do this or fireball. This gives you better range and you can do more attacks over a long duration. And it'd be good for like shelling or sieging a location. And it's also, the AoE isn't as much. Like making it smaller, I think would be good. Have it be like a 5-foot radius. And you could do the flavor of like missing by a bit by having it be a little bit like Infestation. Infestation has you, it's a cantrip, you do some bugs at someone, and then you figure out what direction they get pushed in a little bit. That could be how this works. It's like if you miss your attack roll against their AC or whatever, then it gets offset north, south, east, or west, like by a certain amount. And then it's only got like a 5-foot radius, so it would miss that primary target, but still hit someone nearby or something like that. That could be a way to do it. So I don't know. Personally, I don't like the way you've done the range. I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't not get why you did it, because talking about other ways to do it, it's not uncomplicated, right? But I do think that some of the suggestions I gave they're at least more similar to things already in D&D, which makes them feel a little bit less like you have to learn a whole new thing just for this one spell that is ultimately doing something that is a combination of a normal cannon and the spell Witch Bolt. That being said, I like the idea of this spell. I think that spellcasters having more like very long range options for attacking is interesting. I think that has interesting role-playing implications, especially when they're like this, where like if you attack guards on a wall of a keep 1,000 feet away, they can see the projectile lobbing through the air, So it's not like that balances it a bit because it's got an obvious point of origin. Like they know where it's coming from in all likelihood. So just to be clear, I'm being very critical because that's what you asked me to do. I don't like hate the idea of the spell or begrudge you. Like I don't like the way you did the range, which is completely fine. You're not an idiot. I just don't like it. I think that's a weak point of the spell. So I'd make the explosion range a little smaller. I'd maybe make it a 3rd or 4th level spell. And I might consider using range mechanics more like a ranged weapon, like normal and long range. And then you could add a minimum range again. And simply like rolling a d4 to figure out what cardinal direction the spell misses by. Like if you don't hit their AC. And then that's how you can have it like shell an area. So staple Infestation and a longbow together, and then make it a 3rd level spell, basically. And yeah, the damage might be fine. 3d12, if it has disadvantage outside 200 feet, and you can't cancel it, that's something I noticed, I think. You have height clearance of at least half the distance you're attacking. I don't know if I like that part either. I like the idea that you have to lob it, but I feel like that should kind of just be left to the DM. You did say the direction the spell misses is decided the DM's discretion, but I kind of like rolling for it personally. If it's only a D4, D4s never get used that much anyway, at least not in my games. Anyway, fun, but that's what I think I'd do. Zeret's Arcane Comet, spell number 2. This is another evocation spell, casting time 1 action. And at the start of each of your turns for 1 minute, you can summon an orb of crackling energy which orbits your head. Okay, so there's a thing with this one. It's casting time 1 action, and at the start of each of your turns, so the turn you cast this spell, you use your action and it does not do anything. So it's only the turn after that. We'll come back to that. You can maintain a number of these orbs equal to your intelligence modifier for up to 1 hour. If you hit an enemy with a spell attack, you can hit them with one of these orbs too, which does 2d6 force damage to that target and any within 5 feet. So basically, during the duration of this spell, you will over time gain these kind of additional attacking orbs. And if you hit with spell attacks, not saving throws, but spell attacks during that time, you get to do extra damage. So it's a certain kind of damage buff. And the way it's built right now is it starts slow, basically. Now you have it as 1 minute / 1 hour concentration. At the start of each of your turns for 1 minute, you maintain them for up to an hour. And worded that way, it's like you can kind of precast it. Like you can get it going and then hold them for an hour. And then when you get to a fight, they're ready to go. That's interesting. So I don't hate the idea that it kind of starts slow. 2d6 force damage in an AoE every time you hit with a spell attack is also potentially really, really powerful in the right situation. I'm thinking of like, imagine you use Scorching Ray or Eldritch Blast and Scorching Ray. You're a sorcerer and you quicken. You could hit with a lot of spell attacks in one turn, and then at the start of each of your turns for 1 minute, so you can have 10 of these, and then get them ready, wait 50 minutes or 59 minutes, and if you find an enemy in that time, that enemy is going to the 7 hells. You quicken, Scorching Ray, and then Eldritch Blast, and they take like 5 spell attacks, and each spell attack that hits does 2d6 additional force damage. That is bonkers strong. So I'm not sure. I feel like this is the kind of spell where like if you use it in a way that it's good, it's overpowered, and if you don't use it in a way that it's good, it's terrible, which I think is often a questionable way to design spells. I think it's better to make it like a bit worse when it's good and a bit better when it's bad. And have it have a good use case, have it be powerful in a use case, but not, I mean, this would be nuts in that type of build. Like or you could just be a wizard and take Meta Magic Adept, and you're only going to need 1 quicken spell. with this, whatever you attack is going to be out of this universe. It will be a char stain on the ground after this spell. So I feel like that's a little much. There's a few things you could do. I don't really like the idea of reducing the AoE. Like right now it's AoE. I don't love getting rid of that because 1, I think it makes the spell potentially kind of unique, and it creates an interesting use case for the spell that wouldn't give it like preposterous burst damage to 1 target. It's also good because it makes the spell more niche. You might not know if you're going to encounter a fight in an hour when you want the AoE damage, making it a little bit less likely that you get the super big bongo OP event for the spell. I think D&D is interesting because some of the time you can have those really overpowered moments, but you don't want them to be too reliable or the fights get all samey. If there's a relatively surprising powerful moment, that can be really good. So I want to keep the AoE. I also like the idea that it makes spell attacks have an AoE. Like that's kind of cool, but I think the damage needs to be way lower. This is still very powerful when it's good, even if the damage was like 1d4. Like that would still be extremely strong. There's no save either. If you hit with the spell attack, you just get the damage. Although I think the way Magic Missile is worded, it probably doesn't work that way. So you do have to succeed on a roll, and it just adds damage. But giving the spells like splash damage seems kind of cool. Like that sounds fun. And it is a modest damage buff to your individual attacks as well. There's a couple different ways you could do this. You could make it only happen once per turn. You could make it happen anytime you hit with a spell attack, but make it way less damage, like 1d4 or something. You could do those things. I think I would also rather have this spell like it's an hour concentration, but it takes at the start of each of your turns for 1 minute. Leave that part out of the duration. That's a little confusing. It's 1 hour concentration. The start of each of your turns for 1 minute. You do summon an orb of crackling energy. The player doesn't have to remember. They just start spawning these orbs, you know. That seems fine. and then you can maintain a number equal to your intelligence modifier, which means if you use them while the spell is winding up, you get more out of it. Because over 1 minute, you could make 10, but you'll only ever be able to hold 5 normally, sometimes a few more with some magic items, but which makes the spell a little bit better if you plan it out in a long combat. That's interesting. This is a pretty idiosyncratic spell, but the text is actually pretty elegant. Like I don't mind that. So yeah, I think it's fine. I think this spell is a moderately powerful damage buff. So it feels like it being level 4, 4th level evocation, or enhancement? Evocation enhancement? I'm not sure. Would be good. Another quick final suggestion for weakening this spell would be to make the damage type less good. I think force damage is unnecessary. It's an unnecessary buff to the spell. You're probably already doing a weird rainbow of damage types, and I feel like that would be a way that this spell gains identity, and again makes it like sometimes it would be really bad and you wouldn't know the enemy's resistant to that effect, and you'd saved up all these orbs and they're just not that good. I think that adds texture to magic, and force damage is not to be overused, in my opinion. It should be something that is for attacks that the entire point of them is their kind of absolute power. Eldritch Blast is a really good example. Xerath's Arcane Artillery, the spell before with the force damage, I'm sort of okay with because the spell has enough other things qualifying it that its damage type kind of shouldn't be one of them. But I feel like this is a spell that shouldn't be force damage. It should be something else. I'm not sure what. It could be lightning damage, for example, or fire damage, or bludgeoning damage, for example. But I don't really like it being force damage. That's just me. So that's what I would do. I think I'd make it maybe 4th level evocation, or maybe an enchantment. Make it have 1 hour concentration, get rid of the 1 minute in the duration. I think that's confusing. Otherwise, yeah, I kind of like it. I do like these spells that you have to like commit to charging up more damage and think about, is this a fight where I really care about waiting to get that damage, or should I just blow them up with, upcasted magic missile or something? I kind of like that. So yeah, I'm down with this one. I actually kind of like this. I might use a version of this myself. Moving on, we have 3 more. Cull. This is a necromancy spell, casting time 1 action, range 120 feet, verbal and material components. Vial of any creature's blood consumed by the spell. It's a little confusing sometimes to have a consumed component that doesn't cost money. That sometimes D&D uses components in a weird way, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of a role-playing prompt anyway. What does it do? 120-foot range, it's an action, instantaneous duration. Also, verbal and material, you may or may not rule that you need to be holding the material component. Like you could just have a vial of blood on your person and then speak a word if your hands are tied. That's a minor thing, but I thought of it. Okay, the spell designates a point you can see within range, 120 feet. The spell pulls spilt blood from enemies within a 30-foot radius of that point into an orb that is filled with necromantic energy and strikes the target with the lowest remaining hit points in the area. Okay, interesting. I have a note about that. Deal necrotic damage to this target. No save. Oh, have done a constitution save. Okay. Equal to the missing HP of every creature within this spell's radius. Ah, no. This is so broken. You just AoE... No, this is way too strong. This is like an instant kill on any creature, and yeah, no, we gotta change that. If you do an AoE on a group of creatures and then cast this, you automatically kill one of them. You could say that's a balancing thing, but if it's just like a small number of creatures, you will reliably one-shot whatever this spell hits, or two-shot, I guess, but you did damage to the other creatures. Oh no, my fireball follow-up only one-shots one creature. Like, this is a reward for casting the most powerful kind of spell in situations where that type of spell is already really powerful. I think this is ludicrously overpowered. We need to make significant changes. So what is the concept of the spell? It's an execute. I like that idea. The idea of it, like knowing or you determining the target with the lowest remaining hit points, or the spell kind of deciding who it hits on its own, and you may or may not have wanted that, is interesting to me. I do want to note quickly, and I don't think this is really a problem, the DM can just roll, but like this spell will often be tied. Like you'll cast Fireball, and 4 enemies that are the same creature with the same health will all take the same damage, and then you'll cast Cull, and they will all have the same health. There is none with the lowest health. I do think that's a bit of a flaw with the spell, because the lowest remaining hit points would speed up use of the spell, but more often a situation would occur where there isn't an enemy with the lowest health, meaning you then have to determine that separately. So that's not elegant, but there might be a way to do it. You could just have it be the closest creature if they're all tied, for example. That's fine, but even then that might often be tied. Anyway, whatever, that's kind of a minor issue. Again, the more major issue is that currently it's hilariously overpowered. Again, even having it halved on a constitution save means like the damage is so high that it often won't even matter that it's halved. The enemy will just die. The fact that it's the creature with the lowest health also doesn't help. Now, I do like that the lowest remaining hit points means if there's a weaker creature and a stronger creature, it will generally kill the weaker creature. That's theoretically a good balancing point. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of Sleep, where it's like you care about the creature's hit point total and then you put them to sleep like that. Like, that's interesting. Again, I just feel like the abuse cases for this spell are abundant. If you fight a group of enemies, multiple enemies that are not really squishy, and none of them is standout really squishy, you just fight like 3 trolls or whatever, this spell is crazy. And it's only when you fight, like if you don't fight that many enemies or whatever, but then you just wouldn't use this spell. So when it would actually get used, it would be pretty broken, I think. You could make it very high level. You could just make it like a really high level spell. You could give it a minimum number of targets. That interests me. Like you need to cast it around like at least 3 enemies that have been damaged or something, or you have to spill blood to make it work or something like that. That's a little hacky. I don't think that would fit well in normal D&D, but I don't hate the idea of having a homebrew spell like that. Like, that could be kind of cool depending on your play group. So that's a thought. Maybe you could have it have like a minimum number of targets or something. I'm interested in that. Or it could like gain damage for each damaged enemy and then do that damage to the enemy that has the lowest remaining health, which would then make it, you could balance that such that it would be very unlikely to be overpowered against like only a few enemies. You'd have to have a lot of enemies, categorically meaning your DM probably gave you a bunch of relatively individually weak enemies. You could then balance the spell to have a sweet spot where it's only really effective at executing an enemy when there's like 4 or more enemies mathematically. I don't know exactly how you would do that. That would need a significant rewrite, so I hope you'll forgive me for not doing that here. I would need to remake that from the ground up, and you'd want to do some math. But I hope it makes sense why I think this is pretty broken as is. I think it is a little much. That's just me. But I do like the idea of an execute kind of spell. I'm not sure how I'd do that. It might be like I want the enemy to be below half health or something, or like necrotic damage to this target equal to the missing HP. The missing HP thing really, like, it does damage to the target with the lowest health for each enemy in the area with below half HP. It does like 5 damage for each target like that or something. Something like that could work a lot better. And then with a few targets, this would be like fine but not overpowered. And with a lot of targets, it would one-shot something, but there's a lot of targets, so that's like sort of okay. And the name Cull kind of implies that to me. Like, this is a spell that immediately kills like a single enemy among a group or something like that. It could also be used against like wild animals, like a pack of wolves. There's 6 wolves and you use this. The others are fairly likely to run away if they see one of their comrades get horribly murdered, you know, like the group of them. It could be a good morale spell, like an anti-morale spell. It could work against humans pretty well too, or humanoids. That's kind of interesting. So I don't hate the concept of this. I think it's currently as written, it's preposterously overpowered in certain situations, similar to the initial Zareth's Arcane Comet, but the concept is really cool. So yeah, maybe I kind of like this to be a lower level necromancy spell. Again, my more balanced version where it's like you get 5 flat damage for every enemy below half health in the area. And that damage is dealt to the enemy with the lowest health on a constitution save, halved. And then it's like a 2nd level necromancy spell. Sure, that. I might be down with giving it a bigger radius too. I feel like if you're in a fight with a lot of enemies, that's the only time my version of the spell is good anyway. So maybe it's just 120 feet. Like, it's just enemies within range, like 120 feet. And then the one of those, you don't even really target anything. You just go 120 feet, and then the orb comes up, drawing blood from everyone, and then seeks out the enemy with the lowest health and smites them out of existence. That could be kind of cool. You don't have to target it or anything either. Finally, I think this is a fun kind of spell to make automatically hit. If you were interested in that, this is the kind of spell where I feel like you need setup and you don't even pick who it's targeting anyway, which I think erodes the meaning of having it like need to hit a little bit because you don't even really control where it's hitting. I'm kind of interested in making this automatically hit, but you can decide that for yourself. I did obviously significantly nerf it already, so, you know. All right, last two. Lucian's Lightbringer. This is an evocation spell, casting time 1 action, range 90 feet. It's a somatic and material component spell. You make 4 spell attacks against a target or targets within range, each one a streak of radiant light, visible up to 400 feet away. On a hit, they deal 1d4 points of radiant damage and illuminate the target. They shed light in 20-foot radius until the end of your next turn. If you miss, the light extends the full range, 90 feet, and illuminates a point there. So it's like Scorching Ray, but radiant damage, and the damage is fairly low, but it's a lot of hits. When cast at a higher level, you get an additional beam of light per level you upcast it. Cool. Yeah, so this could be fairly low level. It is magic missile-y. Let's say you made this level 1, you get 4 1d4s, like Magic Missile's 3 1d4s, but they have to hit. They need to get a chance to hit. However, you do roll 4 times, so your chance to get a crit has gone up considerably compared to pretty much every other multi-target spell. I do think this kind of spell can be dangerous because, again, that crit variance, like it's when it crits, it will sometimes do like a really stupid amount of damage, and then a lot of the time it kind of won't. I do also feel that D&D has a few, but enough of this type of spell where if you want to do like a ton of attack rolls, it does also kind of slow down the game. This will depend on your group, but you are rolling a lot of hits, right? It's only somatic. You don't have to say anything, but it is a very visible spell. Like it creates a bunch of light. I'm not sure I feel like there's a good reason for that. Like it's not a subtle spell, but it does let you not speak to cast it, which I feel like would come up only very rarely. Like when you're underwater, I guess. You don't have to open your mouth to cast it, but besides that, it's a very unsubtle spell that happens to not be a verbal component. I feel like if you're going to make a spell not have verbal and somatic components, it should be on a spell that has some really meaningful difference. Like it's part of the spell's identity that it's subtle or in some way, or has some special utility. And I don't really feel this does. Yeah, I don't like this one because I feel like it doesn't do things that D&D doesn't already. It's basically just Scorching Ray, Magic Missile, but radiant damage. The light thing is interesting. It's like a big barrage of light. That's interesting. I almost feel like I'm more interested in that part of the spell. But yeah, I don't love the 4 spell attacks thing. Again, I think there's a lot of variance there. Again, when it's good, it's really good. When it's bad, it's just a bunch of rolling for a spell that does like kind of forgettable damage. But the power level is not necessarily super high, besides those problems I have with it. So you could do like 2nd level, I guess. I'm kind of interested in making this like a beefy higher level spell, like a bunch of beams of light. I do want to say, from a flavor perspective, I don't feel like this is a very wizard or sorcerer type of spell. It doesn't feel like arcane magic. This feels like what a divine caster would use, but you could decide that for yourself. You might not care about that. That's not really the point of this book. You might even say these spells don't have classes, and you could just cast any of them with this book. And this is a divine magic spell, but you just can cast it while you have this magic item. Again, you might not care, whatever. I just thought I'd mention it. Yeah, like what if this... So, 4 spell attacks, when they hit, they create a luminous AoE, that illuminating targets in 20 feet until the end of your next turn. Those do damage too when they expire. You get the 1d4 damage again for all of them when they expire. This would then be a spell where if you hit a bunch of different targets that are clustered together, they take orders of magnitude more damage. And if you hit a small group of enemies with all the little bolts, suddenly this spell would do a ton of damage, even if it's only doing 1d4 per ray, and then 1d4 in a 20-foot radius when it wears off, something like that. That could still do a ton of damage if you had a few targets close together. That's not even that close together, actually. So that's kind of interesting. Then you could make it like a higher-ish level spell, maybe, or it could maintain itself. That my version reminds me a little bit of Heat Metal, where like in the situation, it's a very niche spell, but then you do potentially a ton of damage when the spell is in its element, when you have the right situation for it. That could be interesting. I don't have a whole lot else to say about this one. Like, it's kind of fine from a balance perspective, but I'm not sure it earns a reason to exist in D&D overall, which you may just completely not care about, and that's fine. I do, so that's my main critique. Finally, we have Shirelia's Reverie. I read this one. I like this one. It's casting on one action, enchantment spell, range of 40 feet. That's a little weird. I would maybe make it 30, just because that's a range that D&D uses a lot. But that's a minor design gripe. 10-minute duration, verbal and somatic components. You point at a creature within range. They have to make a wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they fall asleep. If they do, the subject of their dreams starts pouring out of them as a spectral figure or spectral figures. And at the start of their turn, the sleep creature's turn, all creatures within 10 feet have to make the saving throw against those figures or fall asleep as well, and then it continues propagating. So this is like a sleep disease spell, and then it spreads. If a creature is affected by 2 or more dreamers at once from 2 different sleeping sources, they don't have to make multiple saving throws. Good. That would be OP. Each creature affected by this spell falls unconscious until the spell ends, the sleeper takes damage, or someone uses an action to shake and slap the sleeper awake, as expected. Undead and creatures immune to being charmed are not affected by this spell. And creatures immune to being put to sleep, like elves and stuff. Cool. I like this one. It's, yeah, like a sleep disease against a group of enemies, or like a town, like a populated town. This is gas. Like, I feel like this is super good in those situations. It's not like broken, I don't think, but it's good at its job. So this should be a relatively higher level spell, like 5th or 6th or 7th level, and it basically puts an entire group of enemies to sleep. If you have a lot of targets, this will basically just put them all to sleep, I think. I kind of like the idea of creating some kind of design thing where if a creature is affected by like 3 or more of the ghosts, it just fails the saving throw, not because they're teaming up on it, but because over time it will fall asleep in a few turns, and it just means less rolling for the DM. Like, if there's a big group of enemies, you could just assume they all fall asleep. Like, realistically, they will within like 5 or 6 turns. So sometimes it wouldn't matter, but I feel like this is a spell that role-playing would make the bookkeeping for the spell much easier, and maybe the spell's text should include that a little, or you could just do it yourself, that's fine. Decide for yourself. I kind of like the idea of the spread range. Like, it's 10 feet right now. Do I want 5 feet? I kind of do. I feel like if the crowd is small or tightly packed, like that's when it should work really well. Because this is pretty powerful in the situation where it works well. Again, mostly it's crowd control. Yeah, anyway, I like this one. I don't actually have a lot to say. I would just make a few small changes. I think this is cool. I don't feel like there's already a spell in D&D that is doing this, but I really like the idea of this spell. It feels like it leads to good plot pointing. I do think those spells should generally be higher level, like 6th level, because you cast this spell and it like becomes like the news in that part of the world. Like, there's a strange disease where ghosts have been hoobity-dooping up the town, which I think is really fun. Like, that's cool. I do think that should be a higher level spell, personally. For me, it's a good marking point mentally that if a spell is doing something like that, generally that's above 5th level. Like, that's in the domain of like, you're changing the world by casting this spell in some, this is a relatively moderate way. But this would put most communities to sleep. Like, most communities of people would just go to sleep. For 10 minutes, I'm kind of down with making this longer. I feel like it can be an hour, or maybe even longer with concentration, 1 day or something. That might be a little too strong. 7th level. I don't know. I like this one. A good one to end on. This was fun. I like getting to critique the design of these things, so I hope you found some of that helpful. Again, take or leave my advice. A lot of it is my design sensibility. I do think that players on average might find those changes more readable, and that's why I suggested them. That's why I thought they were good advice. But you know your playgroup way better than I do. A lot of that might just not matter, and you don't care, and that's perfectly fine. But I hope it helped in some way. Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. Something a bit new. People haven't really done this before. And I thought it was cool. Thank you. Looking forward to the next one.